Hi everyone, Caleb Rundell here, and this is your video for Acts chapter 12. Chapter 12 revolves around the actions of a person, a king named Herod, and Herod going after leaders of the church. Now, we got to ask a question. Who is Herod, and which Herod is this? So, first I want to tell you, this is complicated because the New Testament, the Gospels and Acts and all the letters happen in a complicated political environment. And that has to do with how the Roman Empire functioned. So if this makes no sense to you and is complicated, that's okay. Because the text really don't explain which Herod is which, and so we got to dig into history to get this figured out. So, who is this Herod that we meet in Acts chapter 12? First, it is not Herod the Great, which is the king called Herod that we meet in the Christmas story. Okay? It is not Herod from Holy Week that we meet during the arrest and trial of Jesus. That is Herod the Great's son, Herod Antipas. Okay? The Herod we meet here in Acts chapter 12 is another Herod, Herod Agrippa, or Herod Agrippa, who is the grandson of Christmas Herod, grandson of Herod the Great, and Herod Agrippa that we meet here in 12 is nephew of Herod Antipas. So a lot of Herods running around, and it's complicated and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's the way that it was. Of course, you can search the internet, you can Google Herods, and there are some great articles that talk about the difference between these three and the different rulers and political structures of this time in there in Palestine and Judea and that part of the world. Now, we want to remember that all of these Herods are not really their own kings. They might have that title, but they are all vassals of Rome. They serve at Rome's pleasure and they serve to further Rome's purposes because that's how empires work. Of course, you can read more up on how that worked. There's lots of good histories that were written at that time or shortly after that time about all the politics and players and all that. The point of this is, regardless of what Herod is doing what, the point of this is the political power structure does not like this upstart Jesus movement. Whatever Herod we're interacting with, Herod the Great in Christmas, Herod Antipas from Holy Week, are now Herod Agrippa here in Acts, we encounter rulers who feel threatened and insecure, that they try to keep their people happy and the religious leaders happy, and so try and blot out this Jesus movement as much as they can. First, they tried getting rid of Jesus. That just made things worse. Now they're trying to get rid of the leadership of here. So here's how this works. In verse 2, we encounter James, son of Zebedee, brother of John, the sons of thunder from the Gospels, and Peter has James, this disciple, killed, and then has Peter arrested during Passover, also known as the Festival of Unleavened Bread. In verses 6 through 19, Peter is miraculously delivered from prison. It's worth noting in verse 9 that Peter is like, there's no way this is happening. Like, this is too incredible. There's no way this is reality. But it is, and Peter is delivered from prison. In verse 11, it's worth noting that Peter talks about how he is relieved to be free of Herod and what's translated usually in English as the Jewish people. What Peter's saying here is that the specific Jewish religious leadership in that particular time and place obviously was out to get him and the Jesus movement. I mean, they got Jesus. They're still trying to, get this Jesus movement under control. And this is not a call where Peter is bad mouthing or being anti-Semitic against all Jewish people. How could he? Peter himself is Jewish, as are all his friends and family. So that is not an anti-Semitic remark. There is no reason for the church through history to take anything from the New Testament to propagate anti-Semitism or hate or prejudice against Jewish people. We're all descendants and siblings of Abraham together. Okay. Always have to say that because unfortunately sometimes people take things from the New Testament and take it to places it doesn't need to go, and that causes all sorts of harm. So always have to say that. In verse 12, we encounter Mary, who is the mother of Mark the disciple. It's always confusing with names because people got multiple names. So this is Mark the disciple, not John the disciple. And that's whose mother we encounter here, Mary, the mother of Mark. Now, in this, there's this funny episode of where Peter has come out of prison. He's carried out of the city. He's walking along. He decides to go to Mary's house. He's knocking on the door, and they don't let him in. First, because the person who answers the door is so ecstatic that she forgets that Peter's there, and then the other people don't believe it. Eventually, they lead him in. It's just one of those funny things from the Bible of like, oh yeah, sometimes we're not, our best selves, and sometimes we just do dumb stuff. And this is one of those episodes. And thankfully, nothing comes of it. It's just a funny story. In verse 17, we meet another James. Now, obviously, Peter is not talking about the James that was just killed by Herod. This James is James, the brother of Jesus. This James is important later in chapter 15 in the Council of Jerusalem, so we want to remember that. So, this James is an important leader in the church, and it is the brother, or if you get technical with it, the half brother of Jesus. Herod then has the guards killed, just angry that someone has to be held responsible. And so people who are pretty innocent in this whole affair suffer. And that's the way our political systems usually go. People suffer for no reason because of the insecurity of political leaders. So it was, so it still is, so it will be for quite some time. In verses 20 through 23, Herod dies, and it's recounted quite graphically. And it's worth knowing that his transgression here is not giving glory to God and taking some credit for himself that he had nothing to do with. And so that's the end of this particular Herod. There are more Herods. We won't encounter them here, but historically, there are more Herods to come. But for this particular Herod, this is the end. In 24 and 25, Saul and Barnabas returned from their mission up north to Antioch. They've been there a year, if you recall, from chapter 11, and they bring with them Mark, same Mark we've been talking about, whose mother's house Peter was at in verse 12. All right, so that's what happens in Acts chapter 12, all about one of the Herods, complicated political structure, but no matter what happens, the ways of God prevail. The church keeps doing its thing. Take care. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being part of the Acts Challenge. We're almost halfway there. Tune in next for Acts chapter 13.